The disappearance of Dr. Adrian Vale began in the quiet coastal city of Hearthaven, a place where fog often rolled in from the sea and wrapped the streets in a thick grey silence. Vale lived alone in a tall Victorian townhouse on Briar Street, a house known for its narrow halls, creaking wooden floors, and a study he rarely allowed anyone to enter. One chilly October morning, his housekeeper, Mrs. Eleanor Briggs, arrived for her usual cleaning routine and immediately noticed something unusual. The door to Vale's study was locked from the inside, and no matter how many times she knocked, there was no answer. Dr. Vale was a man of strict habits, and ignoring the door was not like him. Concern slowly replaced routine. When the police finally forced the door open, they found a room that looked as though time had paused only moments earlier. Papers lay neatly arranged on the desk, a candle had burned almost to the end, and Vale's chair was pushed back slightly as if he had just stood up. Yet the man himself was gone. The windows were locked from the inside, the key remained in the door's interior lock, and there was no hidden passage or sign of struggle. It was a sealed room, a perfect mystery. Somehow, in a space that no one could enter or leave without unlocking the door, Dr. Adrian Vale had vanished completely. As the days passed with no explanation, the police realized they were facing a puzzle unlike anything they had handled before. That was when Detective Mara Ellison was called in. Ellison had built a reputation for solving strange disappearances that seemed impossible at first glance. Calm, observant, and patient, she approached every mystery with the belief that the truth was always hidden in the details people overlooked. When she arrived at the townhouse, she did not immediately begin questioning witnesses or searching the rest of the house. Instead, she stood quietly in the study itself, studying the room the way an artist studies a painting. The air still carried the faint scent of candle wax and old paper. Everything about the room suggested normalcy, not panic. Vale had been working peacefully before whatever happened took place. Ellison examined the locked door, the key still resting in the inside of the lock, and the windows sealed tight against the cold sea air. On the desk she found an unfinished page of notes written in Vale's careful handwriting. The final sentence stopped abruptly in the middle of a thought, as though something had interrupted him suddenly. Ellison knew that locked room mysteries rarely involved magic or impossibility. They involved clever tricks, careful handwriting. The final sentence stopped abruptly in the middle of a thought, as though something had interrupted him suddenly. Ellison knew that locked room mysteries rarely involved magic or impossibility. They involved clever tricks, careful planning, and human motives hidden beneath simple appearances. To solve the mystery, Ellison knew she had to understand the man who had vanished. Dr. Adrian Vale was not a mysterious or secretive figure in Hearthaven. He was a respected historian who spent most of his life studying maritime legends and forgotten stories connected to the sea. His colleagues described him as quiet and thoughtful, a man who preferred dusty archives to crowded gatherings. Yet in the weeks before his disappearance, something had changed. According to those who knew him, Vale had become unusually excited about a discovery he believed would reshape a piece of Hearthaven's history. He had been studying old shipping records connected to a ship called the Aurora Tide, a vessel that had supposedly disappeared in heavy fog more than 2 centuries earlier. Vale believed the official story about the ship's disappearance was not true. Hidden among old insurance documents and shipping manifests, he had found hints of something darker, evidence suggesting the ship had not vanished by accident but had been deliberately destroyed to hide smuggled cargo. The more Ellison learned about Vale's research, the clearer it became that his work might have threatened people whose family names were still powerful in the city. Ellison returned to the study again and again, convinced that the room itself contained the answer. Every surface was examined, every floorboard measured, every corner inspected under bright light. At first the room revealed nothing new. The walls were solid, the fireplace was unused, and the windows appeared firmly locked. Yet Ellison had learned long ago that the smallest detail could unravel the biggest mystery. Late one evening she noticed a faint scratch along the brass latch of the study's largest window. It was so small that earlier investigators had ignored it completely. When she studied the latch more closely, she realized it could be manipulated in a way that most people would never consider. With a thin hook tool, someone standing outside could close and lock the window after climbing through it. The room had not truly been sealed when Vale disappeared. Someone could have entered or left through the window and then locked it from the outside to create the illusion of an impossible mystery. The locked door and untouched key had been part of a carefully constructed deception. With the possibility of an outside intruder now clear, Alyson turned her attention back to Vale's research. Deep within the city archive she found the documents that Vale had been studying shortly before he vanished. Among them were records linking the Aurora Tide to several powerful families whose influence still shaped Hearthaven's economy and politics. If Vale had discovered proof that their ancestors were involved in illegal smuggling and insurance fraud, the revelation could tarnish reputations built over generations. One name stood out above the rest: Victor Calder, a wealthy shipping executive whose family history traced directly back to the investors behind the doomed ship. Calder had donated large sums to the university where Vale taught, placing him in a position to quietly monitor research connected to the city's history. When Alyson investigated further, she learned that Calder had been seen near Briar Street on the very night Vale vanished. The coincidence was too strong to ignore. Piece by piece, Alyson reconstructed the events of that night. Calder had likely confronted Vale in his study after learning about the historian's discoveries. Perhaps he intended to pressure Vale into abandoning the research or keeping it hidden. But the conversation must have turned hostile. In desperation, Calder used the balcony outside the study window to enter the room quietly. What followed was not part of any carefully planned crime but a moment of panic. Vale was overpowered and removed from the room through the same window. Afterward, Calder locked the window from outside using a hook tool, leaving the door sealed from within and the key still in place. The room became a perfect illusion, a place where no one could have entered and no one could have left. The locked room mystery was never meant to be solved. Weeks later, the final piece of the puzzle surfaced along Hearthaven's rocky shoreline. Fishermen discovered a waterlogged crate tangled among the rocks near the harbor. Inside were carefully wrapped documents written by Dr. Vale himself. Knowing the danger of his discovery, he had hidden copies of his research as protection in case something happened to him. The papers detailed the truth behind the Aurora Tide and the families connected to its disappearance. Faced with overwhelming evidence uncovered by Alyson's investigation, Victor Calder eventually confessed. What had begun as an attempt to silence a historian had ended in tragedy. The locked room had not been a supernatural puzzle or an unsolvable riddle. It had been a clever illusion hiding a very human crime. And in the fog-covered city of Hearthaven, the truth, like the sea itself, had finally risen back to the surface.